firelight dances across bone. A hand, steady but ancient with ritual, holds a heated rod against the shell of a tortoise. A crack splinters through the surface, sharp, sudden, like a whisper breaking into the silence. Around it, shadows of men in Bronze Age robes flicker on earthen walls, their faces locked between awe and fear. The question has been asked. The ancestors have answered. But what truly lies beneath these fractures? Are they the oldest sparks of written language, or the remnants of a forgotten magic? Long before inked scrolls and imperial decrees, before the Great Wall or the Terracotta Army, China's first recorded words were not written for poetry or commerce. They were burned into bone and shell, forged in ritual fire, and read as messages from another world. This is not merely archaeology, it is a story of voices from 3,000 years ago, rising through smoke and silence. To touch an oracle bone is to touch the mind of the Shang Dynasty itself, a people who carved their destiny in cracks and ashes. And so our journey begins, not with a pen, but with fire. Imagine northern China around 1200 BCE. The Yellow River winds like a restless dragon across fertile plains, its waters giving life but also disaster. Villages cluster along its banks, smoke rising from clay hearths, bronze vessels gleaming in ritual halls. Beyond the horizon, forests press close, and nomadic tribes hover at the edges of Shang power. The Shang Dynasty is the heart of this land, a kingdom both fragile and formidable. Its kings claim the mandate of the spirits, ruling not only with armies and bronze chariots but with rituals that tether heaven and earth. The court is alive with drums, bells, and the hiss of fire on bone. Here, every decision, when to wage war, whether rains will fall, whether a queen will bear a son, depends on the will of the ancestors. The ritual begins. A tortoise plastron, smooth and polished, is laid on the altar. A question is carved into its surface: will the harvest be abundant? The diviner presses a heated rod, and the bone cracks. The lines radiate outward like lightning frozen in ivory. A scribe bends close, inscribes the king's query beside the fracture, and marks the outcome. Thus history is born, not in ink, but in fire. These are the oracle bones, the first written records of China. But to the Shang, they are not history. They are communication. They are power. Each crack is not random, it is the voice of Di, the supreme deity, speaking through ancestors. The king is no mere ruler, he is an intermediary between worlds. The atmosphere in the ancestral temple is heavy, filled with the smell of burning shell, the low chant of ritual prayers, the gleam of bronze tripods filled with wine. In this twilight of fire and smoke, the Shang kings carve their authority into permanence. Their people believe the cracks reveal truth, and truth sustains rule. Yet, unknowingly, the Shang are creating more than prophecy. They are creating memory. Each inscribed bone, buried and preserved, becomes a fragment of a lost world, a world where war chariots thunder across plains, where blood sacrifices stain the earth, where kings rise and fall by the verdict of ancestors. Centuries later, when these bones are unearthed, their carvings will astonish scholars. What looks like ritual magic is, in fact, the earliest form of Chinese script. Characters recognizable even today, the seed of one of the world's oldest continuous writing systems, are etched into them. The irony is striking. What the Shang saw as divine whispers, modern eyes will see as the first sentences of Chinese civilization. And so, in the crackling fire of the oracle bones, two worlds intersect, one of belief, one of history. The Shang kings continue their rituals, day after day, year after year. Their power grows, but so too does their dependence. Without the voices of the bones, no decision can be trusted. In the flickering shadows of the ritual hall, destiny itself seems to burn and break along with the tortoise shell. The story has only begun. For behind the smoke and carvings lies a dynasty built on both faith and fear, a dynasty where every fracture on bone is a window into war, power, and the rise of kings. And soon, we will step deeper into their world. The oracle bones speak, but they are only fragments. To understand them, we must step back into the world that created them. The Shang Dynasty emerges in the late 2nd millennium BCE, a kingdom rooted in the fertile plains of the Yellow River, yet surrounded by mystery and myth. The river itself is both blessing and threat. Its waters nurture fields of millet, but its floods can erase entire settlements overnight. Here, survival demands order, ritual, and unity, and the Shang kings claim to embody all three. At the heart of their realm rises Yin, the Shang capital, near modern Anyang. It is no simple village. Imagine a sprawl of rammed earth walls, palatial halls built upon high terraces, and bronze foundries alive with fire. Workshops ring with the clanging of metal. Artisans pour molten bronze into clay molds, producing vessels that gleam with spirals and animal masks, objects as sacred as they are beautiful. These are not trinkets of wealth, they are conduits between the living and the dead, vessels for offerings of food, wine, and blood. In the Shang world, nothing exists outside the network of spirits. Ancestors are not gone, they hover, judge, and intervene. The king is both ruler and priest, his voice carrying into the unseen. He summons armies to ride in chariots of wood and bronze, their horses stamping and snorting at the edge of battlefields. He also summons diviners to pierce bone and shell, to ask whether war will bring victory or ruin. Yet beyond the ritual halls lies the broader pulse of the Shang world. Farmers bend low in fields, their tools of wood and stone worn but essential. Hunters return from forests with deer and wild boar. Potters shape clay into vessels for daily life, while weavers spin silk threads that whisper of a craft destined for global fame centuries later. The Shang are not alone in this land, they contend with neighboring tribes, some who trade, others who raid. Each battle and alliance will later echo in the bones, questions etched into shell. Should we attack the Yi? Should we ally with the Zhou? And still, the center of Shang identity is not war, nor even wealth, but ritual. Sacrifice fills the air with the metallic scent of blood. Cattle, sheep, and sometimes even humans are offered to ancestors, their spirits believed to hold sway over every harvest and every storm. To a modern eye, these practices may seem grim, but to the Shang, they are the very machinery of survival. Without sacrifice, the bond between heaven and earth might shatter. The architecture of Yin mirrors this worldview. Temples and altars rise beside tombs of kings and queens. In vast royal burials, chambers are lined with jade, bronze, and chariots, their wheels forever stilled. In one such tomb, archaeologists will one day discover the remains of Lady Fu Hao, a consort and warrior whose resting place speaks of both reverence and fear. She commands armies in life, and in death, she continues to guard the Shang spirit world. The city hums with order, yet danger presses at its edges. Oracle inscriptions reveal constant anxieties, droughts, plagues, invasions. The king is never free from questions. Will the rains come? Will the ancestors bless the harvest? Will the armies of the Zhou rise against us? In every answer, the Shang seek reassurance that their fragile world will hold together. And though their dynasty rests upon bronze and ritual, its strength is not invincible. The very bones that preserve their power also reveal their weakness. For every victory celebrated, there is a fear carved into shell. For every declaration of might, there is a plea to ancestors. Still, in this moment, around 1200 BCE, the Shang stand unshaken. Their chariots rumble across plains, their bronzes gleam in firelight, their city thrives with artisans, warriors, and priests. They believe themselves chosen, held in the hands of spirits who guide their fate. What they cannot know is that the world outside their walls is changing. New rivals grow stronger, their eyes fixed upon the Shang heartland. The Zhou wait in the shadows, their power rising quietly. But for now, the Shang world is alive with fire, with bronze, with ritual. A civilization pulsing at the edge of history, its words scratched in bone, its destiny still unfolding in cracks of shell. And through those cracks, we will step deeper into the rituals that bound heaven and earth together. Night falls over the Shang capital. The air grows heavy, filled with the mingled scents of burning wood, animal fat, and bronze heated until it glows white hot. In the ritual hall, shadows stretch long across packed earth floors. The king sits at the center, surrounded by priests and scribes, the bronze tripods beside him steaming with offerings of millet wine. Silence hangs until the crack of fire against bone shatters it. This is the heartbeat of Shang rule, communication with the dead. To the Shang, ancestors are not mere memories. They are guardians, judges, and sometimes executioners. A father who once ruled does not rest quietly in his tomb. His spirit watches from beyond, demanding respect, guiding his descendants, or cursing them if forgotten. Each ancestor forms part of a chain, stretching back into shadow until it disappears into the realm of the high god who presides above all. The king, therefore, does not govern alone. Every choice is shared with the ancestors. Before war can be declared, before crops are sown, before marriages are arranged, their approval must be sought. Without their blessing, even the strongest army or the richest harvest could fail. The ritual unfolds with precision. A turtle shell is selected, its underside hollowed smooth. Onto it, a question is carved by the scribe's sharp tool: will it rain tomorrow? The diviner then presses a heated brand into the shell. The sudden crack is read like a cosmic script. A scribe records the query, the crack, and the outcome on the bone itself. Nothing is left to chance, everything is inscribed, everything preserved. Around these ceremonies, a theater of power emerges. The king kneels, head bowed, not before another man but before his ancestors. The murmurs of priests fill the chamber like a rising wind. Incense drifts upward, curling into invisible realms. For those present, the cracks are not fractures of chance, they are the breath of the ancestors, the whisper of the divine. To modern eyes, the process seems rigid, almost scientific. Yet to the Shang, it is infused with awe. When the shell splits toward the left, it signals affirmation. When the fissure bends, it is denial. The king's fortunes are bound to these lines. If the harvest fails, the bones reveal why the ancestors had been angered. If victory comes, the bones prove it was foretold. In this way, divination becomes both prophecy and justification. The whispers of the ancestors extend beyond the palace walls. In villages, families maintain their own ancestral shrines, offering food and wine, believing their forebears still dwell among them. The Shang world is layered, the living, the dead, and the divine, all woven together. To neglect the ancestors is to invite disaster. To honor them is to share in their strength. But the royal rituals are different in scale and intensity. Here, entire herds of cattle are sacrificed, their bones destined for questioning. Sometimes even human captives are offered, their lives ending in silence beneath the altar. These sacrifices are not cruelty for cruelty's sake, they are currency in a dialogue between worlds. Blood is the bridge, the price for answers. One can imagine the weight upon a Shang king's shoulders. Every fracture of shell carries consequence. If the cracks warrant defeat, should he march to war anyway? If they promise abundance, can he risk ignoring them? Leadership becomes not just a matter of armies and harvests, but of reading the invisible. The bones are not merely tools, they are chains, binding king and people alike to the will of spirits. Yet beneath this dependence lies innovation. In their effort to preserve every question and answer, Shang scribes develop a system of characters recognizable even now. Etched into bone, these Proto-Chinese characters survive long after the dynasty itself crumbles. The ancestors' whispers become humanity's first written record of China. The act of whispering to ancestors, therefore, is more than ritual, it is the birth of memory. Each inscription is a thought pulled from the air and penned into permanence. What begins as divination slowly becomes history. The Shang kings, intent on securing the favor of their dead, unknowingly secure their own voices across 3 millennia. But inside the palace, none of this is foreseen. For them, the ancestors are alive, watching. The cracks are their speech, the rituals their breath. Night after night, the flames are lit, the bones prepared, the voices summoned. And still, the questions grow darker. Not only harvest and weather, but war and survival dominate the inscriptions. Should the Shang strike first against their neighbors? Will the Zhou rise in rebellion? Will the king's lineage endure? The whispers of the ancestors may comfort, but they also haunt. The dynasty stands strong, but its rulers are increasingly trapped within their own rituals. The bones promise answers, yet those answers bind the Shang more tightly to forces beyond their control. The king is powerful, yes, but his authority is never entirely his own. It belongs, always, to the dead. And as the cracks deepen, so too does the story. For what begins as whispering to ancestors will soon shape the fate of battles, dynasties, and the very course of China itself. The ritual begins not with words, but with silence. In the Shang capital, the hall of divination is prepared like a theater for the unseen. Bronze vessels line the walls, their surfaces alive with curling dragon motifs that catch the torchlight. The floor is swept clean, the altars arranged with offerings of wine and grain. At the center lies a turtle plastron, smooth and pale, awaiting its moment of transformation. The diviner steps forward, his robe brushing against the packed earth. He selects the heated rod, its tip glowing red from the flames. Nearby, the king sits in solemn anticipation, flanked by scribes holding their carving tools. All eyes fix upon the bone. A question has already been etched into its surface: if we march against the Yi, will victory be ours? The diviner lowers the rod. A hiss fills the chamber as heat kisses shell. Then, suddenly, crack! A sharp line splits across the surface, echoing like the snap of frozen wood in fire. The scribe leans close, marking the fracture's path with careful strokes. The verdict is read aloud, an omen of favor. The king exhales, tension lifting from his shoulders. The ancestors have spoken. This is no isolated act. It is the rhythm of Shang life. The procedure unfolds with practiced precision. First, the choice of bone or shell, ox scapulae or turtle plastrons, carefully prepared by artisans who hollow and polish them smooth. Next, the inscription of the question, carved into the surface with deliberate strokes. Then the fire, the rod, the crack. Finally, the record, the query, the crack lines, and often a later note of whether the prediction proved true. Nothing is forgotten. To witness the ritual is to feel the merging of the physical and spiritual. The crack is not random, it is the breath of ancestors made visible. The hall itself becomes a liminal space, where the boundary between living and dead dissolves. The king's role is crucial. He is not a distant observer but the one whose authority depends upon the answer. If the oracle favors war, he rides with confidence, chariots thundering across plains. If the oracle warns of famine, he orders sacrifices to appease the anger of the dead. His legitimacy is carved into bone as surely as the questions themselves. But behind the ceremony lies fear. Every fracture is a judgment. If the cracks oppose the king's desires, what then? To defy the ancestors is to risk disaster, yet to obey may mean delay, surrender, or humiliation. The bones do not merely guide, they bind. The drama of fire and crack is heightened by sacrifice. Before the ritual, animals are offered to the spirits, oxen, dogs, and pigs. Their blood stains the earth, sealing the channel between worlds. Sometimes, prisoners of war share this fate, buried with the bones that bore their final questions. To the Shang, sacrifice is not cruelty but necessity, the price of communication with powers greater than kings. The inscriptions themselves reveal the breadth of these ceremonies. They ask not only of war and weather but of health, childbirth, hunting, and dreams. Will the queen bear a son? Will the rain fall in the 3rd month? Will the king's toothache end? No concern is too small if it touches destiny. Each crack, each word, is preserved. Over centuries, tens of thousands of oracle bones accumulate, stored in pits, buried in temple grounds. They form an archive unlike any other, half ritual, half record. What began as fleeting communication becomes a library of fire-carved history. Archaeologists who uncover them millennia later will marvel at their precision. Here are the first true sentences of Chinese civilization, scratched beside the cracks of prophecy. The very structure of written Chinese, characters etched with meaning, emerges from these rituals. What the Shang saw as divine speech becomes, for later generations, the foundation of literacy. And yet, in the moment, none of this is about history. It is about survival. When drought strikes, the bones are consulted. When enemies gather at the borders, the bones are questioned. When the king's health falters, the bones are cracked again and again, searching for answers hidden in fire. The ritual itself becomes spectacle, reinforcing power. For those who witness it, the nobles, the priests, the soldiers waiting outside, the process proves that the king is chosen, guided, protected by ancestors. Even when omens are grim, the act of consultation shows connection. The dynasty's strength lies as much in belief as in bronze or chariot wheels. But with each fracture, the Shang become more entangled. The more they ask, the more dependent they become. The ritual that sustains their rule also imprisons them within its cycle. The cracks never cease, and neither do the questions. On some nights, when storms lash the capital and thunder echoes like drums of war, one can imagine the flicker of doubt in the king's eyes. Does he truly hear his ancestors, or only the echoes of his own fear? The crack offers answers, but never certainty. Still, the fire is lit again. Still, the rod touches bone. Still, the ancestors are summoned. The dynasty endures, its fate carved into thousands of fragments. And through these rituals, the Shang reveal themselves not only as warriors and kings but as seekers, desperate to bind the chaos of the world with the fragile order of fire and crack. What began as whispers in darkness has become a system, a tradition, a theater of power. Yet every ritual is a reminder, destiny is fragile, dependent on forces unseen, vulnerable to fracture. And it is within these fractures that the Shang kings will find both their strength and their doom. The Shang king does not sit alone on his throne. Though surrounded by generals, scribes, and priests, his truest counsel comes from those long buried beneath the earth. In the Shang worldview, the king is more than ruler, he is the bridge between realms. He wears bronze not only as armor, but as crown and vessel of divine authority. When he raises a cup of wine, it is not to toast victory, but to pour libation for ancestors who linger unseen. His power is not absolute, it is borrowed, mediated, granted by those who came before him. At the royal court of Yin, the evidence of this role is everywhere. Great bronze tripods stand heavy upon the floor, their sides alive with animal masks, tautai, symbols of power and warning. Oracle bones, stacked and stored, wait like questions yet to be asked. At night, the king withdraws into the temple complex, torches casting trembling light against earthen walls. There, he becomes less monarch than medium. It is the king who authorizes questions to be inscribed. Should we ride against the Zhou? Will the rains fall in the 7th month? Should we offer sacrifice to Lady Bai? Though diviners strike the bone and scribes record the cracks, the authority to speak with the spirits rests with him alone. The dynasty breathes through his connection to the ancestors. The king's life is thus bound in ritual. Each campaign begins not with a call to arms, but with the crack of fire upon shell. Each harvest is preceded by sacrifice, each illness by questioning. To govern is to ask, and to ask is to risk an answer that cannot be ignored. Imagine the tension in such a world. A ruler who commands thousands of soldiers, who rides in a bronze-gilded chariot, must pause before every major decision to consult the bones. His authority lies not in his will, but in his ability to interpret the unseen. Power becomes fragile, dependent on the cracks of bone and the whispers of the past. The inscriptions reveal glimpses of these kings. Wu Ding, one of the greatest rulers of the Shang, appears again and again in the bones. His reign is marked by ceaseless divinations, questions of war, weather, and health. He seeks the counsel of his ancestors tirelessly, binding his rule to the authority of spirits. His queen, Fu Hao, emerges in these records not only as consort but as general, commanding troops in battle. Her victories are inscribed alongside the fractures, her name offered to the ancestors as a trusted figure of strength. Through such records, the Shang monarchy reveals itself as both theocratic and dynastic. The king leads armies, yet he is also priest. He governs the living, yet he must constantly appease the dead. His failures cannot be explained away by poor strategy or weak harvests, they are interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. In this way, kingship is both elevated and shackled, its grandeur matched by its burden. The people, too, watch closely. To the farmers in the fields, to the craftsmen in the foundries, the king is not merely a man in a palace. He is the channel through which heaven and earth remain in balance. If drought comes, it is because the king has failed to honor his ancestors. If victory arrives, it is proof of his communion with the divine. Faith and politics intertwine until they are inseparable. But such dependence carries danger. The Zhou, watching from the western plains, are not so bound by ritual. They are rising, gathering strength, testing their independence. The Shang king, however, cannot escape a cycle of questions and sacrifices. His every decision must be carved in bone, his every action justified through the voices of the dead. This gives legitimacy, yes, but also limits. When the ancestors hesitate, the king hesitates too. Still, in their time, the Shang rulers are unmatched. Their bronzes shine brighter, their rituals cut deeper, their connection to the ancestors more vivid than any rival could claim. They believe themselves chosen, guarded by the great chain of the dead, linked at last to Di, the supreme deity. Inside the ritual halls, this belief is palpable. The king kneels before the altar, the fire crackling as it prepares the bone. The room is thick with incense, the eyes of nobles and priests fixed upon him. He does not speak as ruler, he speaks as son to father, as descendant to ancestor. In that moment, he is voice and vessel. When the cracks appear, all hold their breath, for the decision of the dynasty rests within them. The bones have no mercy. They split without care for human desire. Sometimes they affirm, sometimes they deny. The king may rejoice or despair, but he cannot ignore them. Each fracture is final. Each word inscribed upon bone is carved into both history and destiny. Thus the Shang kings become remembered not only for their armies or wealth, but for their conversations with the dead. They are men who spoke with spirits, whose reigns were haunted by questions, whose answers shaped the course of their people. Yet even as their voices echo through bone, a shadow grows. For dependence on the ancestors makes them strong in belief, but vulnerable in practice. Rivals who move with human calculation alone may one day outmaneuver kings bound to fire and crack. But that is still to come. For now, the Shang kings reign, their power shimmering in bronze, their words etched into bone, their spirits tethered to ancestors who whisper from beyond. And in the next chapter, those whispers will shift from questions of kingship to matters of survival, war, and harvest. The oracle bones do not speak in poetry. They speak in questions, urgent, practical, sometimes desperate. In the palaces of Yin, the king leans forward as the scribe cuts into a turtle shell. Will it rain in the third month? Another bone bears the words, if we hunt today, will we catch game? On others still, the stakes rise higher. Should we attack the Zhou? Will the East submit? Will victory be ours? War and harvest, these are the twin pillars of the Shang world, and both are fragile. The kingdom's strength depends on the rhythm of the seasons. Millet fields stretch across the plains, green shoots rising with promise. But the Yellow River is unpredictable. It can bless with fertile silt or curse with floods that sweep away entire villages. A single drought can wither crops, a single storm can shatter the year's supply. To the Shang, the harvest is not guaranteed, it must be secured through sacrifice, through the favor of ancestors, through the cracks of bone. When rains fail, the king orders ceremonies of desperation. Great fires are lit, sacrifices made, questions pressed into bone after bone. Will heaven send rain if we offer 10 oxen? The shells crack, the verdicts are given, and the people wait, scanning the skies for clouds. In such moments, the fate of thousands rests on fissures carved by fire. But harvest alone cannot sustain a dynasty. The Shang are warriors. Their bronze chariots rumble across open plains, their troops armed with spears and axes of polished metal. The oracle bones tell campaigns against neighboring tribes, the Yi to the east, the Chan to the west, the Zhou rising in the shadows. Every battle begins in the ritual hall. Every campaign is decided not first by generals, but by ancestors. The questions echo with anxiety. If we strike the Zhou, will Di grant us victory? If we attack the Yi, will the harvest still prosper? The answers are fractured into shell, binding the king's decisions. Sometimes the verdict is favorable, and armies march. Sometimes the cracks forewarn defeat, and the king hesitates, unwilling to challenge the ancestors' judgment. These inscriptions reveal the Shang kings as men caught between bold ambition and fearful restraint. They command armies but cannot act without approval from the dead. Their generals may be fierce, their weapons unmatched, but the rhythm of their campaigns is tied to the brittle surface of bone. And yet, the system works, at least for a time. Victories come, prisoners are taken, lands are expanded. Each triumph is recorded in the bones, the names of enemies defeated, the spoils claimed, the sacrifices made in gratitude. The cycle repeats, war brings captives, captives are sacrificed, sacrifices bring ancestral favor, favor brings new victories. But this cycle is also a trap. As dependence on divination deepens, kings and people alike surrender more of their agency. Success is credited not to strategy or courage but to the will of ancestors. Failure is not a matter of poor planning but of neglected spirits. Responsibility dissolves into ritual, and ritual becomes the true battlefield. In the countryside, the people live this rhythm in their own way. Farmers watch the sky with wary eyes, their lives tied to whether the king's rituals will coax rain from heaven. Warriors march when the oracle bones decree, their loyalty bound not only to the king but to the unseen powers he serves. The entire kingdom moves as if by the pulse of ancestral whispers. The questions of war and harvest also reveal the Shang worldview in stark clarity. They are not abstract philosophers seeking truth for truth's sake. They are pragmatists, asking what must be done to survive, to conquer, to endure. The ancestors are not distant idols, they are managers of reality, arbiters of rain, war, and fertility. Still, the cracks reveal cracks in the dynasty itself. For every confident declaration, there are inscriptions of doubt. For every victory, there is a question of failure. They show appear again and again in the bones, growing stronger, more threatening. The king asks not only if he will defeat them, but whether his dynasty will endure. Beneath the surface of ritual lies fear, the knowledge that no empire is eternal. One can almost see the scene unfold, the king's hand hovering as the diviner lowers the rod, the court holding its breath, the crack splitting across the bone. If favorable, relief spreads through the hall like a sigh. If dire, silence lingers heavy, broken only by the scribe's chisel. Through these rituals, the Shang carve not only prophecy but history. The bones preserve the very questions of war and harvest that consumed their rulers. They reveal a people who saw survival not as chance, but as negotiation with the divine. And in this negotiation, every fracture mattered. Every harvest gained or lost, every war won or delayed, every life spared or sacrificed, was etched, recorded, remembered. The Shang kings believed their questions bound heaven to earth. Yet in the shadows of those questions, a rival power gathers, less bound by ritual, more patient in strategy. The Zhou wait, watching, preparing. The cracks of the oracle bones promise answers, but they also foreshadow the fractures of a dynasty. The fire hisses, the bone cracks, the verdict is spoken. But the ritual does not end there. A scribe bends low, carving strokes into the shell beside the fissure. His knife cuts deep, preserving the king's question and the outcome of the omen. With each stroke, sound becomes sign, thought becomes mark. What began as fleeting words whispered in smoke becomes permanent on bone. This act, almost secondary to the ritual, carries consequences the Shang themselves cannot foresee. For in their pursuit of answers, they create something greater, the earliest form of Chinese writing. The inscriptions are sharp, angular, and spare. Lines cut into bone form the ancestors of characters still used today. A sun with rays becomes the word for day. A crescent moon curves into month. A child cradled by arms means birth. These symbols, once sketches of the visible world, evolve into a system, compressed, standardized, enduring. Each question etched onto bone is more than ritual, it is a lesson in language. To walk among these fragments is to glimpse the origins of a script that will carry China's story across millennia. Scholars who later unearthed the bones in the late 19th century will marvel that their shapes, though ancient, can still be read. What the Shang kings meant only as records of divination becomes, in hindsight, the seat of the longest continuous writing tradition on earth. But in the Shang court, the weight is immediate, not historical. Scribes must be exact. Their carvings are not decorative but sacred, part of the ritual itself. To miswrite a name or confuse a symbol risks angering the spirits. Each mark is both record and offering. The hand that cuts the character is steady not only with skill but with reverence. The characters spread beyond mere ritual. As the practice of inscription deepens, bones begin to record not only questions but outcomes. The king hunted, 3 deer were taken. On the 7th day, rain came. The queen bore a son, it was auspicious. Slowly, the cracks of divination expand into chronicles of life. The Shang, without realizing, are writing the first history of China. Bronze inscriptions soon echo this innovation. Vessels cast for ritual sacrifice bear characters honoring ancestors, marking victories, or dedicating offerings. What began on bone and shell now gleams in metal, enduring beyond fire. The Shang script becomes a tool of memory, a means of binding the present to both past and future. The artistry of these inscriptions cannot be overlooked. The early characters are bold and direct, their forms shaped by the medium of bone. Later, as writing moves to bamboo strips and silk, the brush will soften their lines, but here, at the beginning, they are raw, cut with the sharpness of ritual urgency. They speak less of beauty than of survival. In these strokes lies a revelation, language itself is power. To question the ancestors is one thing, but to write the question is another. Writing fixes the fleeting. It outlasts voices, shadows, even kings. Though Wu Ting and Fu outpass into their tombs, their queries endure. Though generations fade, the cracks and the characters remain, silent yet unbroken. But for the Shang, writing is not yet the universal tool it will become. It is confined to the court, to rituals, to the bones and bronzes. The farmers who till millet fields and the hunters who stalk deer do not write. Writing is sacred, not common. Its keepers are scribes, bound to the palace, their knives shaping destiny with every stroke. Still, its potential grows. Each etched bone is a fragment of continuity, carrying voices across time. And continuity, in China, will become civilization's heartbeat. Unlike many ancient scripts that vanish with the cultures that made them, these characters endure, evolving but never breaking. From oracle bones to bamboo scrolls, from carved stone to printed books, the line remains unbroken. The irony is sharp. The Shang sought only to question their ancestors, never to create a literary heritage. Yet their fear of the unknown, their reliance on ritual, gave birth to one of humanity's greatest inventions. Out of cracks in bone came characters, out of characters, history, out of history, civilization. Inside the ritual hall, the king watches as the scribe carves, unaware of the future. He sees only the present, the verdict preserved, the ritual completed, the ancestors appeased. He does not know that in these characters lies his truest immortality, not the armies he commands, not the bronzes he raises, but the words etched beside the fractures of fire. The oracle bones, once buried in pits around the capital, will one day resurface, their inscriptions still legible after 3,000 years. Scholars will trace them, connect them, marvel at their continuity. The Shang, through their rituals of divination, will be revealed as the unwitting founders of Chinese writing. Thus the cracks of fire become more than omens. They become the script of a civilization. And in this transformation, from cracks to characters, the Shang Dynasty steps beyond its own horizon, leaving behind something greater than its power, a language that will carry the whispers of the dead into the voices of the living. But while writing endures, dynasties do not. As characters spread, the Shang world begins to fracture. Beyond the walls of Yin, rivals stir. Among them, the Zhou rise, preparing to challenge both bone and throne. In the heart of Yin, the Shang capital, the dynasty proclaims itself eternal. Vast walls of rammed earth stand like guardians over palaces and ancestral temples. Bronze vessels gleam in torchlight, their surfaces carved with dragons and tigers that seem to writhe when the flames flicker. Oracle bones are buried in pits around the temples, tens of thousands of them, each inscribed with the questions of kings. The ground itself becomes a library of fire and bone, a record of power unlike any the world has seen. Here, kingship is more than rule, it is ritual. The Shang king is not merely a sovereign, he is the bridge between the living and the dead. Through divination, he asks where to march his armies, when to sow millet, whether his queen will bear sons. Victories and losses are justified by the cracks in bone. To obey the spirits is to survive, to ignore them is to risk ruin. And so the Shang Dynasty, in its very foundation, is carved into bone and shell, preserved not in stone monuments but in questions to the ancestors. The dynasty grows rich on the spoils of conquest. War captives are brought to Yin, their labor feeding the temples and palaces, their blood offered in sacrifice. Bronze, the lifeblood of Shang power, flows from smelting pits into molds, producing weapons and vessels that dazzle and intimidate. Each bronze piece is both tool and symbol, a blade for war, a chalice for spirits, a mark of the dynasty's divine mandate. The capital hums with life, artisans shaping jade, potters firing clay, scribes etching bones. Yet beneath the grandeur lies unease. Every battle won is confirmed by the oracle bones, but every question also betrays anxiety. The cracks reveal more than prophecy, they reveal fear. Fear of drought, of invasion, of ancestral displeasure. The bones are not only records of triumph but confessions of weakness, anxieties carved into history. At the center of this world stands Wu Ding, remembered as one of the Shang's greatest kings. His rule expands the dynasty's reach, his armies pushing the frontiers wider than ever before. Yet even he turns constantly to divination, his campaigns prepared only after fire and bone confirm their favor. His queen, Fu Hao, commands troops in battle, her name preserved in inscriptions that speak of victories won under her leadership. In this dynasty, even the women of the royal court take roles of extraordinary power, their deeds etched into the same bones that preserve the king's voice. And so the Shang move their dynasty into a tapestry of ritual, bronze, and writing. They believe themselves unshakable, ordained by the ancestors whose spirits speak through fire. But beyond the walls of Yin, another power is watching. The Zhou, to the west, grow restless, their leaders studying both Shang weakness and Shang splendor. They too invoke ancestors, but they see themselves not as supplicants, but as inheritors waiting for the right moment. For now, the Shang dynasty still glitters. Bronze vessels are buried in great tombs, alongside jade ornaments and chariots for the afterlife. Palatial complexes rise with beams of timber and tiled courtyards, echoing with the sound of drums and ritual chants. The Shang king presides as the sun dips below the horizon, the fires of divination rising to meet the dark. Questions are asked, cracks appear, and scribes bend to carve. The cycle repeats, endlessly, question, crack, carve, bury. With each ritual, the dynasty tightens its bond to the past, but blinds itself to the future. For the oracle bones, while preserving continuity, also trap the Shang in dependency. Every decision must be confirmed, every fear exposed, every hope reduced to fractures on bone. A dynasty carved in bone is strong, but also brittle. The earth beneath it grows heavy with secrets. Thousands of pits, filled with bones and shells, lie buried just beyond the palaces. Each fragment is a fragment of life, the hunts, the harvests, the wars, the births, the deaths. To walk among them is to hear the whispers of a dynasty speaking across time, the echoes of a people who made memory itself sacred. And yet, this dynasty carved in bone cannot last. Already the Zhou sharpen their spears. Already the mandate the Shang claim from their ancestors flickers in the eyes of their rivals. The very system that binds the Shang to the dead will one day justify their downfall. For when the dynasty falls, the bones will not speak for them, they will speak of them, preserved as the testimony of a civilization both brilliant and doomed. The Shang believe themselves immortal, but their immortality lies not in their kings, their armies, or their bronzes. It lies in the inscriptions cut by humble scribes, etched deep into bone and shell, waiting for millennia to be uncovered. From cracks to characters, from questions to chronicles, the Shang carved their dynasty into the marrow of time. But just as cracks reveal omens, fissures begin to appear in the dynasty itself. Westward, the Zhou prepare their challenge, carrying a new idea of power, the mandate of heaven, that will outshine the Shang's bond to ancestors. The dynasty carved in bone is about to meet a storm of steel and fire. The walls of Yin once stood as the heart of the Shang dynasty, their palaces alive with ritual and bronze, their oracle pits burning with the smoke of sacrifice. But the voices that filled those halls now fade into silence. The Zhou armies sweep in from the west, their banners rising against the horizon like a storm cloud. The Shang, fractured by years of dependence on ritual and the weight of their own fears, cannot withstand the tide. The battle is remembered in fragments, bronze weapons clashing, war chariots thundering across open plains, ancestral shrines burning as the Zhou advance. The Shang king, Zhou Xian, remembered in legend as cruel and reckless, watches his dynasty crumble. Whether vilified by later chronicles or undone by fate, his reign becomes the symbol of decline. The Zhou declare his defeat not as mere conquest, but as cosmic justice. The silence that follows is heavy. Ritual fires are extinguished. The great divination halls, once alive with cracks and inscriptions, fall quiet. The scribes put down their knives. The ancestors no longer speak through bone and shell. A dynasty carved into fire and bone dissolves into ash. Yet even in silence, the Shang leave shadows that cannot be erased. The Zhou, though conquerors, cannot ignore what they inherit. The bronzes of the Shang inspire their own. The oracle bones, though buried, whisper of a world where kings once questioned spirits with fire. The Zhou answer not with cracks and bone, but with a new doctrine, the mandate of heaven. Where the Shang had bound themselves to ancestral will, the Zhou expand the idea, the heavens themselves judge dynasties. Victory proves favor, failure marks condemnation. In this way, the silence of the Shang becomes the voice of the Zhou. The fall of Yin is not merely an end but a transformation. The Zhou kings, while condemning Shang cruelty, also preserve Shang practices. They continue rituals, sacrifices, and ancestral veneration, but with their own twist of legitimacy. The cracks of bone no longer dominate, but the memory of them lingers, a reminder that divine authority must always be renewed. For centuries afterward, the Shang are remembered in fragments, part legend, part cautionary tale. The Zhou chronicles cast them as both glorious and corrupt, a dynasty of brilliance undone by excess. Stories of cruelty and decadence grow, perhaps exaggerated, but they serve the Zhou narrative that heaven had turned its face from the Shang and blessed the Zhou instead. The bones, however, tell a quieter truth. Long buried in the earth around Anyang, they wait. The Zhou may silence the rituals, but the inscriptions endure beneath the soil. Thousands of years later, farmers unearth them, mistaking them for dragon bones ground into medicine. Only then will scholars realize what they are, the earliest Chinese writing, the preserved voice of the Shang. But in the centuries after the fall, the silence is total. The Shang capital lies in ruins. Its oracle pits are sealed, its rituals abandoned. The Zhou established their own capitals, their own rights, their own system of legitimacy. The once mighty dynasty carved in bone is reduced to memory, shaped by the victors who replaced it. And yet, that silence carries a paradox. Though the Shang are gone, their influence permeates the Zhou world. The Zhou kings cannot erase what came before. They inherit bronze technology, ritual practices, and the idea that rulers must justify power through the divine. The Shang spirit lingers like smoke, invisible but present, carried forward in custom, language, and belief. The Shang fall, but the bones do not vanish. They lie beneath fields and rivers, beneath the footsteps of farmers and the foundations of villages, waiting. Their silence is not absence, but latency. In this stillness, the Shang achieve a strange immortality. Their dynasty, though destroyed, becomes one of the great turning points in Chinese history, not for its armies or its kings, but for the fragile inscriptions left behind. The silence after the fall is the pause before rediscovery, the centuries of forgetting that make their eventual unearthing all the more astonishing. And so, as the Zhou rise and the mandate of heaven begins its long reign, the Shang rest in the earth. Their voices are buried, their fires extinguished, their city turned to ruin. But beneath the soil, etched in bone, the questions remain: will it rain? Will the king triumph? Will the queen bear a son? First writing or ancient magic? Divination, history, and how they shaped the first Chinese dynasty. 3,000 years will pass before those voices are heard again. The silence after the fall is not the end. It is the waiting breath before history returns to light. Beneath the soil of northern China, the bones slept for millennia. Their inscriptions, once read by kings and scribes, lay hidden, forgotten by dynasties that rose and fell after the Shang. Farmers dug them up, calling them dragon bones, grinding them into powder for medicine. They saw not the words, but only the marrow of myth. Yet within those fragments, history itself was waiting to be rediscovered. In the late 19th century, scholars finally looked closely at these strange markings. What had seemed like cracks or scratches revealed themselves as something more: characters. Ancient, angular, unmistakable. Suddenly, the forgotten voices of the Shang spoke again. Questions of kings, prayers for rain, records of sacrifice, all etched into bone 3,000 years earlier. China's first script had survived, preserved not in monuments of stone but in the fragile remains of ritual. The discovery was staggering. For the first time, the Shang Dynasty moved from legend to history. The oracle bones confirmed what ancient chronicles had whispered, that the Shang had ruled with bronze and ritual, their kings mediating between living and dead. What had been myth became fact, drawn not from rumor but from the Shang themselves. And in those inscriptions, something more profound was revealed. The script carved into turtle shells and ox bones was not a dead tongue, but the ancestor of a living one. Across millennia, Chinese writing had evolved, yet its roots lay here, in these earliest forms. A sun etched as a circle with rays still echoed in the character for day. The crescent moon, still month. The hand holding a child, still birth. Continuity unmatched in the world, a writing system that began in fire and bone and endured into the modern age. This continuity is not merely linguistic but civilizational. Writing gave China memory. It bound together generations, preserved records, sanctified rituals, and gave voice to rulers and scribes alike. While other ancient scripts, Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, faded into silence, the Chinese script never broke. It bent, it transformed, but it never died. The bones of the Shang gave birth to a living tradition, one that would carry China through empires, invasions, revolutions, and into the present. The legacy is visible not only in the written word, but in the idea of history itself. The Shang may have inscribed bones to divine the future, but in doing so they preserve the past. Their rituals recorded names, events, victories, defeats, the first annals of a civilization that would forever value history as a guide. China became a culture of record, where the deeds of kings, the mandates of heaven, the cycles of dynasties were written, read, and remembered. Yet the oracle bones are more than artifacts. They remind us of the thin line between magic and knowledge, between superstition and science. What began as a plea to ancestors became the foundation of literature, philosophy, and statecraft. The Shang sought omens, but they created continuity. They sought certainty, but they built memory. In their search for answers from the dead, they gave voice to the living. Today, the oracle bones rest in museums, their surfaces cracked, their characters sharp even after 3,000 years. They are studied by scholars, admired by visitors, revered as the origin of written Chinese civilization. But to look upon them is also to feel their strangeness. These are not mere documents, they are questions, fears, and hopes etched into bone. They are the raw humanity of a dynasty, kings desperate for guidance, queens yearning for heirs, farmers praying for rain. And so their legacy is not only linguistic or historical. It is emotional. The bones show us that across thousands of years, the human heart has not changed. We still ask, will the harvest come? Will our children be safe? Will our future endure? The Shang may have turned to fire and cracks for answers, but their questions are our own. The oracle bones remind us that civilization is carved not in stone, but in memory. That writing is more than symbols, it is survival. That through language, the dead speak and the living listen. The silence that followed the Shang's fall has long since broken. Their voices, once buried, now resound again. And in those voices lies the enduring truth of their legacy, that the first writing of China was born from magic, but became history. From the ashes of divination rose a script that carried a civilization through time. From cracks in bone emerged the unbroken thread of one of humanity's greatest stories. The oracle bones are not just relics. They are beginnings. They are the moment when questions became words, and words became eternity.